Hi, romance readers. I am Liz Donatelli. Welcome to Reader Seeks Romance, the #1 romance novel talk show on YouTube. USA Today bestselling author AMALIE HOWARD joins me to discuss her Victorian historical romance, Always Be My Duchess, book 1 in Taming of the Dukes series. And AMALIE answers questions about her reading and writing life in Quickies Q&A. Enjoy, and be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Hi, AMALIE. Welcome to Reader Seeks Romance.
Hi, Liz. Thank you so much for having me. It's really nice to be here.
It is a pleasure. Let me start by saying that the blurbs on the front and back cover of Always Be My Duchess, they're very impressive. Fabulous writing, such a delicious escape, utterly delightful, Eloisa James. AMALIE HOWARD tells a story with self-assured style, wit, and energy. Her writing sparkles, Lisa Kleypas. A must-read author, Jodi Picoult. How does that make you feel?
It makes me feel pretty awesome because those are incredible writers. I've read all of Lisa Kleypas's books. Eloisa James is phenomenal. She's a fantastic writer and a really nice person. Lisa is also a really nice person. And then Jodi, we became friends in the last few years, and she is just such an inspiration, not just as a writer, but just as a person, and the way she kind of elevates, marginalized voices. And she's very outspoken in the community, which I love because, we need that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, do you feel pressure? Like, oh, wow, Eloisa James said this, so now I can't disappoint her ever. I've got to make sure I'm always topping myself. Or are you able to take it in stride and in a healthy mindset?
My goodness, Liz, I take nothing in stride. I literally panic about everything. So yeah, there's a little bit of that, that you want to kind of measure up when somebody says something about your writing, and not even in future books, like in current books. If you want, you want the book to succeed and do well because they said it was great, and you want other people to also say it was great. So there's that little pressure there as well. But once you write a book, it belongs to the reader, so you kind of have to step back from that a little bit. Always Be My Duchess is a cross between, it's a mashup between Pretty Woman and Center Stage. And if you know those two films, one is, a pretty iconic rom-com with Julia Roberts and Richard Gere, and the other one's a ballerina school type, movie where this girl moves to town and wants to be the best ballerina she can be, and goes through a set of troubles, and then by the end of it she triumphs. So in Always Be My Duchess, it's about a down on her luck ballerina who has been sort of shunned from every major theater in Paris and London, and she's desperate to find a job to look after her sister who's been injured. And in London she meets this duke whom she saves from cut purses, and he realizes that she is exactly the person that he needs to kind of fool the town that he is a family guy, because he's really interested in his business and buying up unentailed property. And this earl that he's working with says, I can't sell this to you. It meant a lot to my late wife, and you're not a family guy. So he, there's this fake engagement for, kind of mutually agreeable arrangement between them. And then later on, sparks fly and magic happens, and they kind of both get past themselves and fall for each other. That was very long, but yes.
No, that was perfect. The opening scene is really hot. It is sexually tense. Did that scene enter your mind first, and then you're like, I've got to write the book that goes along with this scene? Because that, I still am thinking of it like at least once a day about that, the scene, the predicament they find themselves in, that it becomes a very sexy, titillating experience. Yeah. So is there any, do you have a story behind the writing of that scene? Where did it come in the process of writing?
Yeah, that's a good question, because sometimes, when you come up with different ideas, like the idea for this book was the mashup, right? It comes of you have this idea, and then you have a heroine that you sketch out and then the hero. But that particular meet cute, like I just knew I wanted flames at the start, and then the flames cool down as they know they have this insane chemistry because they're in this, alleyway together, and it's a very fraught situation, and they're responding to each other on a very physical, normal level. And she's a ballerina, so she's very, you know she's conscious of her body.
Yeah.
And I think it's awesome when it's in her point of view, because she describes, feeling a little bit kind of hot and bothered. And it's also
Yeah.
because he's also feeling hot and bothered. Everybody's hot and bothered in this alley. But then when they make the arrangement, they have to kind of calm down and get to know each other. And it's funny, like people ask this question a lot because, when my husband and I met, we met in New York City,
Mhm.
and it was kind of like that. We ended up talking and we had one kiss, and then he lived in London and I lived in New York. So we separated and we had a long distance relationship for 6 months. So over that 6 months, we got to know each other on a, mental, emotional level. And, the sparks that we had at the start sort of kind of grew
Yeah.
out of a more, like a broader relationship. So, I
Yeah.
mean, I guess that's the answer. Like I had that in my own sort of history, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. Let's have something passionate, and then let's
Yeah.
get to know our characters a little bit better and make sure that when they do come together, you know, it's more meaningful, right? Because it has all the
Right.
layers.
Right. I'm so glad I asked about that. I said, there's got to be a story behind this. There's so much in this scene. So, where were you and what were you doing when the idea for Always Be My Duchess took root in your mind?
That's also a good question. I can't really remember. I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, I love watching movies. It's one of my favorite things to do in my downtime, that and reading, spending time with my family. But I was thinking, oh, some of those rom-coms were really great. And originally, the first book was supposed to be 10 Things I Hate About You, but that's actually going to be the third book. And that's one of my favorite movies. So I thought, oh, what would this look like in the historical Victorian setting? And, obviously you can't have a retelling that isn't fresh. So the
Mm,
adding of the ballerina, and then also I didn't want to make it about sex work, even though that is, I mean, female agency and female empowerment, you want that stuff to be, positively written about,
yeah.
spoken about, because there's no shame in, you know, anything like that. But I
Mhm.
felt like the ballerina element was just, I have dance in my own background, and I thought
Yeah.
the similarities between ballerinas in the 1800s and, women who, well, this is a weird thing, but women who make choices to support their families and whatnot, it was very similar.
Mhm.
Um, Men, took advantage of them in the dance halls and the back of the dance salons, and it was very similar.
Right. What you said just set up my next question, which you kind of answered. Since Always Be My Duchess is inspired by Pretty Woman,
Mhm.
I was actually expecting it's Nev, correct?
Nev, yep.
I expected Nev to be a courtesan or a woman working
Yeah.
at a brothel.
Mhm.
And Tamira Julia Roberts's character. But so finding out she was a ballerina, at first I was like taken aback. But then as the book goes on, you realize that ballerinas had just as difficult a time, if not a harsher time, than living
Mhm.
as a sex worker back in the
Yep.
Victorian era.
Yep.
So I thought that was really interesting because at first I was like, oh, well, a ballet dancer, oh, that's probably pretty glamorous and well respected, and you didn't have to deal with a lot of BS. But
It's
in
yeah,
many ways, it
it's
was worse.
Yeah, it's actually not. There were mothers who would arrange contracts for their daughters with wealthy gentlemen who, came and supported the theater and the
Mhm.
opera, because once you had I think they were called ebony, once you had one of those, they paid for your lessons, they paid for shoes, they paid for
Yeah,
classes, they paid for costumes and lodging. So it
yeah.
was in the mother's best interest of, to negotiate a contract, even though it's so just,
Wow.
the thought of it is quite shocking.
Yeah.
But the conditions that they, you know, lived in were very similar to, a courtesan, in a brothel or
Right.
um, something like that. The
Yeah.
transactional nature of what they did was very similar.
Yes, yes. And that was to me the most eye-opening part of reading your novel. And I've read other Victorian novels, but never one with a ballet dancer. So I'm like, well, that's an interesting choice because Julia Roberts was a sex worker and here's a ballet dancer. And I was like, I guess that's where Amelie deviates. But actually, yeah, it was a really interesting, unexpected twist for me. Speaking of Pretty Woman, for the fans of the movie, in which ways would you say that Always Be My Duchess is similar?
You had the really iconic cover that they did. I mean, the iconic dress on here is very,
Yeah.
Julia Roberts, Pretty Woman-esque when she goes to the theater with him,
Mm-hmm.
the opera with him, and the transactional nature of the plot. Where she accepts money for her time, like he buys her time. The arrangement they had between them, going to different events and grappling with her position as a paid employee versus what she had to present to the to high society, I think is similar as in Pretty Woman. And then also the really shady guy who makes his own assumptions and, obviously, you know, is very inappropriate. But what I love about that is she handles it herself. So that is a little bit different from the Pretty Woman score where Richard Gere comes in and saves the day. I'm a
Right.
big believer in, women saving themselves and, having their own agency.
Lysander, the male protagonist, is your first neurodivergent hero, which
Hmm.
I understand wasn't the original plan. So I have two questions about that. One is what inspired the change, and how did changing Lysander's character change the romance journey that you had originally planned for Nev and Lysander?
Hmm. Oh, I love those questions. When I originally wrote the synopsis, it was, you had like the grumpy sunshine matchup. I
Mhm.
knew I wanted him to be like inaccessible, but as I started writing him, so my middle son is neurodivergent,
Okay.
and we were entrenched in therapy and, trying to figure out, especially me as a mom, how to navigate with this child in a positive way. And a lot of the characteristics that my son has, he's very he's very, binary in his thinking. He's very emotionally detached. He's very focused on one thing at a time. He's been diagnosed with a slow processing speed, but he's very, very intelligent. So how I explain that is we'll be having a conversation and he'll pop in his thoughts 5 minutes later after the conversation's moved on. Um,
Gotcha.
so he
Yeah.
doesn't, he's not as quick to express his thoughts or feelings. He's very, low empathy. So, it's hard sometimes
Okay.
to deal with someone like that. And I found myself writing those characteristics into Lysander's character, which was interesting because it did make him a much more complex hero. And the thing is, like, I loved Nev anyway because she was just she was in tune with herself, in tune with her feelings, and she was very vibrant. So she was there saying, you don't have to hide. You don't have to feel like, you don't deserve love or you're not worthy of love because of, whatever you have going on inside. So she
Right.
was very accepting. And, I think it ended up being I hope it ended up being a much richer story for it.
I do enjoy the language you use because you use a lot of words and phrases of the era that it always helps me put me in that time and place. I always appreciate it. And, like in the first chapter, what stuck out was what did they call the thieves, the coin, the coin
Oh,
purse?
cut purses.
The cut purse,
Yeah.
like just words like that, and throughout the novel. So I always appreciate the language and sprinkling that throughout.
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of those ideas for using, language of the period, comes from reading other great historical romance
True.
writers,
Yeah.
and seeing it and going, oh, what's that? And you look it up and you're like, wow, that word existed in the 1400s or 1500s. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? I use etymology.com to pretty much verify
Oh.
everything because you want to make sure that you don't, but me as a writer personally,
Yeah.
don't use words or terms that didn't exist.
Right.
Um, because I think it's important to have that. Like I wouldn't use like, I mean, this is a ridiculous example, but like plastic, right?
Mhm.
I mean, that didn't exist.
Yeah.
So
Right. Now, have you ever thought about creating your own word and using it and making it seem as if, okay, yeah, that was used in the Victorian era, just making up a word? Have you ever thought of doing that?
No, the only thing I've ever made up is like a duke's name or a place name because,
Mhm.
we have like in historical romance, 9 million dukes, which didn't exist back then. It was much, much, much
Right.
less. And I make those up because I don't want to have connections with actual real names because those people have
Of
real
course.
lived histories, and I don't want to ever,
Yeah.
be disingenuous about it or write something that wasn't true. So I make up the names of my
Right.
characters.
Okay. Well, I encourage you to look into creating your own word. I'm thinking something like, instead of saying a man's, penis or cock or whatever you want, I would think pants devil.
Pants devil.
I could kind of see
the,
pants devil.
the, the pants devil that jumps out.
I think I could kind of see
I'm
that
dying.
in Victoria. Oh, his pants devil's getting
Very naughty.
very
Very
naughty.
naughty.
What a naughty
Acting
fun.
up.
I'm just offering that to you. I mean, you could throw that in a future novel.
Yeah, I'm digging it. I kind of like it. I kind of like it.
Yeah,
S Pants Devil needs a spanking,
Pants
everyone.
devil.
so this is a question that I don't ask enough of authors, but it's something I'm always
Wait a second, Liz. Now you have me thinking about what's the counterpart going to be to that, right? So, like, do we call it an angel muffin?
Angel muffin.
heaven slice of
Oh my
heaven.
God.
My pants devil in your slice of heaven. Or you could do angel muffin. You could do that. And then future up and coming authors would be like, well, yeah, I learned about pants devils in Amalie Howard's book. And
And then I'm going to be like, it was Liz Donatelli's idea. She told me to do it.
I'm all right with that being my claim to fame. Do you have characters whispering in your ear saying, write my love story? Do you just think of a scene? How do you process the story?
Writers have this thing where they say they're either pantsers, so they write by the seat of their pants, or they're plotters, and they plot out every detail. I mean, I
Right.
have friends who write full drafts of like, we're talking 40,000 words before they even start writing, and I'm like, oh, that's a lot. And I always was a pantser in the beginning. I said, like, I go where my characters take me, and they take me on a journey. And if I say I want you to go here, and they go, nope, we want to go over there, that's their decision.
Right.
But as I got like, as you get more contracts and you have to provide, a synopsis for the work, you start to have to think out like where you want to go from a plot perspective. So you have the characters, like, and in this case, Pretty Woman meets Center Stage. I had a general idea of what the plot was. And then I figured out what I wanted for my characters, the grumpy sunshine, fire ice kind of dynamic,
Yeah.
a little bit of enemies to lovers in there. And then you kind of, then I sketch those out. But the driving force of writing in my later career has been driven by plot. I think plot comes first, and then my characterization comes later. The first romance novel, apart from like Sweet Valley High, and I'm really dating myself now, is probably Anne of Green Gables, which I read super young, with Anne and Gilbert, like in their sort of enemies to friends to later lovers, but that kind of push-pull angst and I really loved growing up. And then the first novel, probably with Smexy Times, I'd probably say was Whitney, My Love by Judith McNaught, which maybe 13 or 14 I read that, maybe 14. And it was so good. Oh my gosh, so good. That book was, written a long time ago. So are there problematic elements in terms of like the hero and how he acts with the heroine? Yes, there are. The issue I was talking about was an issue of consent. Which is like, and consent is something that I love. I have to include in my books because I think it's really important. But my memory of the book is one that, I was like, wow, I want to read everything this author has ever written. And I did. I read Judith McNaught's entire backlist and then moved on to Julie Garwood and moved on to Jude Devereaux and Joanna Lindsay. Those were the 4Js. And I read everything I can get my hands on.
What are you currently reading?
Oh my gosh, listen. I am reading the most incredible book right now. Okay, so I'm a book hoarder. So what I'll do is like I'll either buy a book or borrow it and then sit on it because I know I'm gonna love it. And I'm like, I need it. And when I'm in a really crappy place, I read it.
Okay.
So I was kind of like holding on to this book for months, and it's Things We Never Got Over by Lucy Score. And because she's an incredible contemporary writer and I love her work, this book is awesome. It's so well written and it's like really like gets you in your feels, and the guy is super grumpy and the girl is like, you know, she's a fixer and a pleaser. So it's interesting to watch that dynamic. And then the book I read right before that, which I have to mention, is Ilona Andrews, their latest book, Ruby.
Ruby Fever?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, Ruby Fever. So good.
Well, you just answered question number 2 as well, because question number 2 is what's the last book you read? So well done.
Oh, yes. Ruby Fever by Ilona Andrews. And it is, you know, that whole Hidden Legacy series is my jam. I love anything with magic. Put magic with hot, sexy romance, and I'm like, yep, take my money.
Which book is on your to-be-read pile?
Oh, to be read. That's another good question. The one that I have that I'm reading next is Megan Quinn's next book, Royally Not Ready.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
That looks pretty interesting. And then I had I'm Jennifer Armentrout's latest is also The War of Two Queens is next. If I get burned out on, you know, fantasy or, you know, paranormal or contemporary, I kind of switch around.
You have to. You have to cleanse the old reading palette. How many hours per week do you spend writing?
I feel like I should cover my face with a book for this question because like it should be more than it is, but it's so bad. I think like writing depends on your state of mind, emotional well-being, physical health, anything else you have going on in your life. So I can't really put like an hour on it, but if you don't have another job, you know, I mean, which is like a 40-hour work week, typically, right, for a regular job. I don't know if I say 40 hours is a lot. It sounds like a lot to me to be constantly writing. But if I take the 7 days and I do write on the weekends, I'd probably say like, you know, 30 hours, maybe 20 to 30 hours. Spend the other time, basically, if you have other books out, editing, you know, doing revisions. What else? Doing promotion stuff, like, you know, events. I mean, that takes up a lot of time as well. So for sure. I try to get up early when I'm on deadline, which I'm on deadline now, like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, and write until I have to take my kids to school. Yeah. That's like a solid 3 hours each morning. Okay. So, and if I get those in, like if I slack off for the rest of the day, I don't feel terrible. Okay. But if I don't get them in, then I'm like, oh my gosh, I need the words.
What is your romance writing superpower?
My romance writing superpower is writing in a room full of screaming children.
Which is more difficult for you to write? The opening line of a novel or the very last line?
I would say probably the last line. Because I am an overthinker. So I always think it's not good enough, or I always second guess it. Whereas the starting line, I already know where I'm going. Because I'm like that horse that's out of the gate. You know, like, yeah, let's go, let's get it. But at the end, you always want to leave it with the most, like, with something that's like, you know, that will give a reader that sense of yes. Right. Okay.
What are you currently working on?
Right now, I am writing I just finished up edits for the middle grade that I sold with Penguin Random House. It's called, with Delacorte, it's called Bumps in the Night. It's based on Caribbean folklore, so I'm really excited about that because I get to write about some of the stories that I grew up with from my home country of Trinidad and Tobago. So super excited about it. I just turned that in on Monday. And then I'm writing the 4th book in my inclusive romance series with Sourcebooks. So this book comes out in November, and it's the Duke in Question, and it's the book after that. Gotcha. That I'm writing right now. So much pressure on myself to get those words. That's why when you ask those questions, I was like, I really should have had some words today. I had 800 words today, Liz. That's it. 800.
But first of all, that's better than nothing. That's better than just hitting a
That
wall.
is true.
Well, I hope that as you write, you can include a Liz Donatelli character.
I am gonna include Pants Devil somewhere. Like, I mean,
Pants-
come on.
It could be like a funny little character named Lady Elizabeth Donatelli, and she's like, "Oh, look at his pants devil! I can see it through his trousers."
Oh, that actually sounds quite funny. And I do like writing the funny side characters. So like the aunts and the sisters and the friends. And
I know that. So I'm just saying. Well, Amalie, it has been a sincere pleasure to chat with you. Thank you so much for taking time to join me here on Reader Seeks Romance.
Thank you so much for having me on Reader Seeks Romance. It's been fantastic. You're incredible to talk to. And now I'm like fired up to go figure out what's in these characters' pants.
A devil is in the pants. That's the answer.